Most people would think that the Caribbean would be pretty safe during a global conflict, since none of the islands would actually be involved in the warfare, but that's far from the truth. In fact, the Caribbean would be one of the most strategic regions utilized by larger nations during a global conflict. Today, we'll explore how a global war could potentially transform every Caribbean country into battlegrounds, refugee camps, and resource extraction zones. First, let's talk about why the Caribbean matters so much in global warfare. When we look at this map, the Caribbean sits at the crossroads of 3 continents. Every major shipping lane between North America, South America, and Europe passes through these waters. Plus, let's not forget about the Panama Canal. This 50-mile waterway handles 6% of all global trade. In wartime, controlling or destroying the Panama Canal could cripple economies overnight. And guess what's perfectly positioned to control access to the canal? The Caribbean islands, specifically Cuba and Jamaica. We don't even have to just imagine. Looking back at history during World War II, the Caribbean became a crucial battleground for this exact reason. German U-boats prowled these waters, sinking over 400 Allied ships. The United States even created a military base in Jamaica called Vernam Field. This U.S. Air Force base was built specifically for World War II, but was decommissioned after the war. But it does give us a glimpse of specific islands that would be more implicated than others. But strategic importance is just the beginning. Let's look at how this would actually play out, starting with the economic devastation that would happen almost immediately. Since tourism accounts for up to 90% of GDP in some Caribbean nations, countries like Antigua and Barbuda, the Bahamas and Barbados would see their entire economies evaporate overnight. Think about it. When World War III breaks out, who's going to book a vacation trip to Jamaica? International flights would be grounded, cruise ships would be requisitioned by militaries, and resort workers would lose their jobs by the millions. We're talking about an economic collapse that would make the 2008 financial crisis look like a minor hiccup. But it gets worse. Food security is a huge problem for many Caribbean countries, since the majority of them import all their needs, which includes food, fuel, medicine, even basic supplies. During a world war, shipping becomes incredibly dangerous. Commercial vessels will likely operate at a mere fraction of what they can do, and supply chains will undoubtedly be broken. Jamaica imports around 70% of its food. Barbados imports 80% of its energy. The Bahamas imports virtually everything except fish and salt. When those supply ships stop coming, these islands would face starvation and energy crises within weeks. Remember when that one ship blocked the Suez Canal for just 6 days? Other ships were forced to take alternate routes, which ended up causing global shipping delays for months because it totally screwed up timelines and delivery dates. And that was just 6 days of just one ship blocking a route, so we are not prepared for the damage a war would cause. The economic collapse would be devastating, but it would also trigger something even more dangerous: a massive humanitarian crisis. World War III wouldn't just impact people living in the Caribbean, but would also affect people living around the region as well. The islands would be flooded with desperate people seeking safety. The Caribbean sits right between the United States and South America. When major cities start getting bombed, when countries start collapsing, millions of refugees would pour into the Caribbean. These small islands, many with populations under 100,000, would suddenly face refugee populations that could double or triple their size in the span of weeks. Imagine the Bahamas with 400,000 people, suddenly having to house another 800,000 refugees from Florida or Venezuela. The infrastructure simply wouldn't be able to handle it. Hospitals designed for 50,000 people would be overwhelmed with 200,000. Government services, stores, housing, water systems, everything would quickly collapse under the pressure. This is alongside the economic devastation that already came along with the war. So in reality, these countries would be working with around 70% less than they would regularly under normal circumstances, which now means mass starvation would become a real possibility. Civil unrest would be inevitable. When people can't feed their families, when there's no fuel for generators, when hospitals run out of medicine, desperation takes over and social order starts to break down fast.